I'm Nora Dudwick, and I'm board president of xMinds, the organization hosting tonight's presentation about secondary school placements. And we do have another meeting running simultaneously on preschool placements. If that's the session you wanted to attend, please switch now. The link is in our chat.
Muy buenas noches, soy la señora Dora Dudwick, soy presidenta de xMinds, la institución que está patrocinando esta reunión. Esta reunión es para lo que es ubicar a estudiantes en la escuela secundaria. Los que quieran, hay una reunión paralela para los estudiantes preescolares. En la ventana del chat ustedes pueden hacer un switch para ir a esa otra conferencia para estudiantes preescolares. Esta de aquí es para los estudiantes de la escuela secundaria.
Thanks. Okay, so what you're going to hear today, this evening, is a review of all the services and programs that MCPS offers to middle and high school students on the autism spectrum. MCPS and xMinds have partnered to provide you with all the essential information about these programs so that armed with that information, you'll be better equipped to assess where your child might best be served. Remember as a parent that you are an important part of your child's IEP team. The more you know about your child's placement options, the more effectively you'll be able to advocate for your child. Our speakers are MCPS staff who know these programs intimately. We're very grateful to them for taking the time to prepare their presentations and being here to share what they know and to answer your questions. Just as there's a wide range in the support needs of students who are autistic, there is correspondingly a wide range of programs that MCPS offers to support them. The first 4 presentations cover services leading to diplomas. These are the Learning and Academic Disabilities, LAD, Autism Connections, Autism Resource Services, and Bridge. Sorry, I'm seeing something up here about language. I want to make sure. Okay. I hope everyone hears me all right. If not, let me know. Okay. The second set of presentations will cover certificate programs, Learning for Independence, School Community-Based Program, the Classic Autism Program, and extensions. These programs are arranged roughly in order from those that provide the least support to those that provide the most support. But remember, in practice, there's a considerable overlap. We've asked our presenters to minimize specialized terminology, but if you hear something you don't understand, please ask for clarification in the chat. I know many of our listeners are new to special education and might not be used to some of the specialized terms. We'll have 2 brief breaks in the presentation for questions, one in the middle and one at the end. We've asked speakers to provide detailed descriptions of each program and to highlight key differences between them. Please be aware that the programs may vary to some degree from school to school. For each of these programs or services, we ask presenters to tell us the general profile of students who thrive there, what parts of the day students are in self-contained classes versus co-taught or supported classes in the general education setting, where do students spend lunch and resource? For programs where not all the students are autistic, to what extent are best practices for students in autism, students who are autistic, used? How does the program support development of social skills and executive functioning skills? For the LAD and homeschool model, where students remain in the general education setting, what supports are commonly provided to autistic students? And what are the supports that cannot be provided in that setting? Please write your questions for the presenters in the chat at any time. and our facilitators will read them out to the presenters when we get to the Q&A break. When you ask your question, please keep in mind the following. Presenters know all about the programs they run, but they don't know your child, so they can answer questions about the programs, but they won't be able to really tell you where your child would fit best. As I mentioned, as you know, we're recording this in English and Spanish, and we will email you a link to the recording in the next few days, as well as a link to the slides. Now, before we launch into the presentations, I have the pleasure of introducing Mrs. Kia Middleton Murphy, Acting Director, Department of Special Education Services. She's going to provide a brief overview of MCPS placements, including percentages of students who are placed in each of the programs. So Kia, let me turn the mic over to you.
Thank you so much. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us, especially after a long weekend. It's like a Monday, but it's Tuesday, so I do appreciate all of you being here with us. It is my pleasure to begin the evening with a warm welcome on behalf of Diana Wiles, who's the Associate Superintendent for the Office of Special Education, as well as myself from the Department of Special Education Services. The Office of Special Education highly values the longstanding partnership that we've had with Extraordinary Minds. We know that xMinds shares the goal of ensuring parents in our communities are aware of the continuum of services for students with autism spectrum disorders in Montgomery County Public Schools. MCPS continues to see very significant growth in the number of students with autism spectrum disorders that we serve, as you will see tonight while we talk about the services. In addition to the growth in autism worldwide, we hear from families who move to Montgomery County specifically so their children can learn with the experts we have, some of whom you'll hear from this evening. We take great pride in the confidence you as parents have in our teachers, paraeducators, therapists, and all of those who stand by your children each and every day. Tonight, you will hear about the broad continuum of services that we provide in Montgomery County Public Schools to make sure that our students are prepared to leave us as valuable members of our community, no matter the path that they are pursuing after graduation. Please, please, please take note. We intentionally speak of services rather than programs to remind ourselves and to let our communities know that Montgomery County Public Schools provide students services that are on their individualized education programs. A program, it's a place. Services are the specially designed instruction and the related services required by a student to make progress on their IEP goals and objectives. MCPS places great importance on family engagement, and we rely on partners like xMinds, to help us reach families of all students, particularly those receiving special education services with autism. These opportunities offer learning and networking opportunities designed to support and enhance parents and guardians' ability to meaningfully participate in the students, their children's individualized education program meetings. I would like to thank the president of xMinds, Nora Dudwick, the vice president, Sue Keisler, and Melanie Carlos, the executive directors of xMinds, for our continued partnership. I also want to say thank you to our staff. We really appreciate all that you have done to prepare this presentation and all of the information that you will provide to parents and community members this evening. And of course, Mr. Mejia, we could not do this without your assistance. I also want to thank the parents. Thank you for taking the time to increase your knowledge base and of course to support other parents in their journey as they learn more about special education services. Again, thank you to everyone who has worked so hard to make this evening a success. Okay, so, oops, I'm sorry. Our outcomes, thank you. Our outcomes, we are going to inform you of the continuum of special education services provided by diploma-bound services, as well as alternate learning outcomes. Next slide. Okay, so here you will see the breakdown of special education students who have autism spectrum disorders and where they are served in our different services. I'm just going to give you an opportunity to take a look. I know that the writing is a little small, but as you can see, the non-public schools, I just want to make sure that everyone understands, those would be services that are outside of Montgomery County Public Schools, so that a student receives services that are more restrictive. And that's 6.36%. Autism Connections is 2.53. Autism K-12 is a student that's, is the services that support students on alternate learning outcomes. It's 12.05%. And then we have Autism Resource Services, which is diploma-bound. Bridge Services, which falls under special education services. And so that, social emotional special education services. And that is a very small percentage of 2.30. Extensions is a set of services that is non-diploma bound, or that students are working on alternate learning outcomes. We also have Twice Exceptional and Homeschool Model. Homeschool Model and Learning and Academic Disability services are in every single school. Homeschool Model is in every elementary school, and LAD, or Learning and Academic Disabilities, is in every middle and high school. We have learning centers, which are only in elementary schools. We have Learning for Independence, which are services for students on alternate learning outcomes. And then we have what are called MCPS special schools. That would be Carl Sandburg, Stephen Knowles, and Longview. We also have resource services, which are in all schools, elementary, middle, and high school. We have school community-based. We have social emotional special education services. And then we also have speech resource services. Next slide. I see a great question about the difference between autism resource services and learning and academic disabilities. The great news is that you will hear more about that this evening. So first we have Ms. Laura Johnson, who is an area supervisor, and we also have Ms. Devonna Holmes. Dr. Webb was not able to join us, so I want to hand it over to Ms. Holmes and Ms. Johnson to tell us about learning and academic disabilities.
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So tonight we will be talking about a variety of different services that we have here in MCPS. And this slide is a reminder that the special education process for any services starts with the Individualized Education Program, or IEP team. Once a student has an IEP, it is the team that determines the level of service that is required. And then in turn, it is the level of service that determines where those services can be appropriately implemented. And so we go through the process and we start with the IEP team. Next slide.
The Learning and Academic Disabilities, or LAD services, are available in all secondary schools, as Mrs. Middleton Murphy mentioned. The majority of a student's day is spent with non-disabled peers, and services are provided through a combination of time both in and outside of general education. Classroom instruction is provided by a variety of providers, which include the general education teacher, special education teacher, or a special education paraeducator. Students who receive learning and academic disability services, or LAD services, may have a variety of disabilities, and that also includes those with autism spectrum disorder. Next slide. Students with autism spectrum disorder can be provided supports in LAD, such as whole and small group instruction, individualized support, and once again, both inside and outside of general education. Some students may have a resource class. Related services such as speech and language, occupational therapy, any other supports may be provided. Supplementary aids and services and accommodations to support communication, executive functioning, and behavior challenges can also be provided. And last but not least, assistive technology. Both low or high tech supports can be provided to students if they need it. I'm now going to turn it over to Robin Daisy to discuss Autism Connection Services.
Thank you. So I'm Robin Daisy. I'm an instructional specialist with Autism Services. And so I'll be talking about Autism Connection Services, which at one time we did call Asperger Services. But we have fully transitioned to the new name, Autism Connection Services, and we often refer to it as Connections, just as our shortened name, a little less of a mouthful. So if we want to go to the first slide, I'll talk a little bit about the characteristics of students who are typically served in Autism Connection Services. So the students in Autism Connection Services are typically students who are on or above grade level in academic subjects. They often, or they also have above average expressive and receptive language. So we see a lot of strengths in their expressive and receptive language, but they may have needs in social language. But in general, academically, they have a lot of strengths. Language-wise, they have a lot of strengths, but they have some specific needs that warrant some unique services. They are typically students who are motivated to perform academically, but they have a lot of challenges that really result from needs in executive functioning skills. So those are things like beginning, sustaining, completing tasks, organizing materials, organizing computer-based work, as well as the executive functioning needs that result in cognitive rigidity or that inflexibility that's common for students with autism. Socially, the students generally most often have a desire to develop social relationships with their peers, but they often are students who, before coming to us, have really struggled to find friends among their neurotypical peers in their neighborhood schools. And so oftentimes that's one of the things we see as a benefit to the service, is that many of our students do often find a peer group among students in Autism Connection Services. Certainly, they still have lots of opportunity to access general education peers throughout the day, and will also certainly have the ability and opportunity to make friends with general education peers. But we do often see that one of the benefits is that the students sort of find their people in Autism Connection Services. So that's kind of the profile of the students that we serve, and then we'll go ahead and move to the next slide, and it's kind of the complement of here's who we serve now, here's how we serve them. So in terms of the time in general education versus outside general education, most of the students in Autism Services are spending a small portion of their day up to, depending on their age level. In middle school, it would be up to 3 periods of the day. In high school, most of our students have only 1 or 2 classes outside of general education. So in middle school, that is going to be for the English language arts, which in middle school is just called Advanced English 6, 7, or 8. As well as a social skill class and a resource class that really targets those executive functioning needs that I talked about earlier. In high school, the instruction outside of general education is typically limited to just the resource classes, where the primary focus really does shift in the high school to supporting the executive functioning needs, because the workload, of course, increases with high school. But a component of the time in the resource class is also to provide more individualized social problem solving for students, either one-on-one with a student or in a small group. In terms of the remainder of the day, the students are in general education, and depending on their needs, as well as their age, there is the capacity to support in the middle school. General education classes can be supported by special education staff for really any other part of the day, with the one exception being that we don't always have the capacity to support electives for students who have room in their schedule for an elective. But typically our students will have special education support, so a special education co-teacher or a para-educator in their other classes, so things like math, science, social studies, as well as PE, and that could be in either an on-level math class or an advanced math class. At the high school, generally speaking, The majority of our students might start with a lot of support for their general education classes for the core content areas, again, for either the on-level or the honors level classes. But we do often see that students don't continue to require that necessarily all 4 years, but if students do, we have the capacity to provide that for all the way up through graduation for, again, for their core content areas, English, math, science, and social studies. And then again, as well as the resource classes. All right, and now I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Claire Lanham, who's going to be talking about Autism Resource Services.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Claire Lanham, and I'm also an instructional specialist with Autism Services. So we could go ahead to the next slide. And I'm going to be talking tonight about Autism Resource Services, which are services that begin at 6th grade and go through high school, so middle and high school services. Autism Resource Services is commonly referred to as ARS, but that does stand for Autism Resource Services. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the students we serve within ARS. And so these are some of the characteristics of students who are typically served in our services. Our students are typically functioning independently below grade level in their academic areas. However, even though they may not be at grade level, they are able to access the general education curriculum in those academic areas, even though they may be below grade level. But they do, in order to access that curriculum, require some adjusted pacing of their instruction, some pre-teaching and reteaching of academic content, especially academic vocabulary, and some really individualized scaffolds and supports in order to meet those curriculum demands due to their deficits in some of their academic areas. These areas range, they are individualized, but these may be things like math problem solving, so those word problems in math, reading comprehension, so that understanding, especially when we talk about grade level reading material, and that reading material that the curriculum requires of students in all subject areas, science reading and social studies reading. Our students typically do have delays in their language, so in their expressive language, in how they communicate with others and how they understand what is being communicated to them, so their receptive language skills, as well as their social or pragmatic language. And because of these expressive, receptive, and pragmatic language delays and some needs in social areas, our students do typically tend to be a little bit socially naive when we compare them to their grade-alike peers. And our students do struggle to engage with those peers without some support and some really intensive teaching of those social skills. They struggle with those social skills. So they need that direct feedback in the moment as well, and can sometimes get into social misunderstandings because of that lack of social understanding. So how do we serve our students? So I'm also going to talk about middle and high school because it does vary a little bit between those two settings. So typically in middle school, our students do require some level of self-contained or instruction outside of general education for some of their academic classes, depending on the student and depending on their specific needs, as well as a place and a time in their day to learn those direct social skills that they are needing, and executive functioning skills as well. So again, our students spend part of their day in that self-contained or instruction outside of general education setting. And then when our students are in the general education setting, they do have special education support. So again, that could be a special education teacher co-teaching the class, or a special education paraeducator supporting the academic and the social needs of our students when they are in the general education setting. And that could be for an academic class, science, social studies, math, but it could also be for their electives and PE, as well as some support at lunch, especially to support those social needs in the lunchroom. When we do get to high school, oftentimes our students are able to be successful in maybe slightly more general education classes than they may have been in middle school, or that may be a goal for them during their time in high school. But typically the schedule still does allow for us to access some instruction outside of the general education setting. So again, that's our self-contained special education setting, specifically for that reading, some direct reading instruction, resource class to address academic needs and social skills needs, and some of those core academic classes that students are required to take as they work towards the requirements of their high school diploma. And similarly, when our students are in the general education setting, so in those inclusion classes, we are able to provide that special education support, teachers and paraeducators to support the students in, again, both the academics and the social needs. Something else worth noting is that many students, it is an individualized decision, but many students served in ARS services do take longer than the 4 years to complete their high school diploma. So it is very common for students to remain in high school for a 5th year to gain all of the requirements that they need for their high school diploma. Again, an individualized IEP team decision. I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Ives.
Thank you, Claire. Next slide, please. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Sandy Ives, and I'm Supervisor of Social Emotional Special Education Services. And Bridge is one of these sets of services that falls under that umbrella. And Bridge is serving students in middle and high school programs, and all of our students are diploma-bound. Next slide. So our students are cognitively and academically average to above average and are accessing the general education curriculum, usually on or above grade level in the core academic subjects. Next slide. A little bit about the student characteristics. Our students are challenged by this list of things that we have here: a lot of social vulnerability, difficulty with problem solving and perspective taking, abstract thinking, interpreting social skills, establishing and maintaining relationships with peers, group and collaborative learning, coping with anxiety, school stressors, emotional regulation, changes in routine and transitions. A lot of sensory sensitivity, pragmatic language, and executive functioning skills as well are areas of need. Next slide. So I too will talk about what does this look like in middle and high school. In our middle school, our services are actually located in a suite of classrooms, which is off of the large middle or high school hallway, so that we're able to provide a more protective environment for self-contained classes, which are available in English, science, history, math, physical education. We actually have our own PE teacher, and some electives we are able to do in a self-contained environment, and of course, resource. In our resource class, we're really working on the social skills and the executive functioning and support with work completion. We also have support by paraeducators in general education for some electives when our students are out in inclusive opportunities. And a key aspect of our services is that we have a licensed clinical social worker working in our services, and they are able to provide group counseling. So we're really honing in on those social skills. And in addition, they're doing a lot of on-the-spot problem solving when students are having challenges, helping students to generalize what they're learning socially and emotionally in the counseling groups. So that is a wonderful service that our students really depend on. At the high school level, instruction outside general education is available for the core academic subjects. We have a PE teacher at high school as well, resource and certain electives. As you get into high school and students require higher level courses, that's when we have to get creative in figuring out how to support our students out in inclusion so that we are providing them with their IEP accommodations and supplementary aids and services. We also have special educator, paraeducator support at the high school level. And again, that group counseling is an integral part of services for all of our students delivered by the social worker. One thing I don't have on here, we also have a psychologist who is consulting with our Bridge services and collaborates with the social worker as well. I think I'm turning it over to the Q&A. Is that right?
That is
Or-
correct.
Okay.
That is. Thanks, Dr. Ives.
Thanks.
So we will turn over to Q&A now. There are quite a few questions in the chat already, and Julie Saw, from xMinds will be reading out the questions. Some of the questions have already been answered in the chat, but there are quite a few remaining. And then when she's read those out, if you want to raise your hand, she can pick on participants. Please note that if you state your question, unmute. You can raise your hand by pressing the reaction button on your menu, unmute yourself, and then once you've asked, mute yourself again. Okay, so over to you, Julie.
Hi, I'm gonna try, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and try to get through as many questions as we have because there are a lot that came in. The first one is talking about kids with a profile of being twice exceptional. They require gen ed support, but they're also gifted. So one, what would be the best program for such a profile child? And what is the best program for such a profile child needing executive functioning and social skills support specifically?
So I'll jump in and answer that question. I think it's really hard for any of us to be able to give you a specific answer, mainly because, and I say this without a hint of sarcasm, but it's an individualized education program. So we would really want to look at all of the child's data to be able to make that decision as an IEP team. So what you're hearing tonight is an overview. And so the more we know about a child, the better we can support the parents and guardians with making appropriate choices along with the IEP team. So what we can do, and I think we probably should have thought about this, is making sure that we connect parents with the special education supervisor that's assigned to the school that can support them if they want to find out more information beyond tonight. Nora, I can provide you with that list.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next question is, what is the main difference between services offered through Bridge and SCSES program?
So I can take that. So Bridge services are one of the sets of services we have under the Social Emotional Special Education Services umbrella. And it is specially designed for students that present with the characteristics that I shared. And these students may be on the autism spectrum and also may have other disabilities. The disability code doesn't drive the set of services. So we're really looking at the whole child and trying to figure out, based on the goals and objectives, what are the appropriate sets of services. But Bridge services really can provide a more protective environment for students that really require smaller self-contained instruction for a good portion of their day. And they require counseling services from the licensed clinical social worker that we have. So there are a lot of social emotional goals on their IEPs that need to be addressed through whatever set of services are appropriate. And Bridge can offer a fairly intense set of services for students that require that level of support.
Thank you. The next question asks about a specific middle school program. It says Silver Creek Middle School has a speech and language service. How does that differ from speech and language offered in other autism programs? I wasn't sure if Silver Creek Middle School actually has an autism program.
Silver Creek does have an autism program. We'll hear from Ms. Dunbar later this evening about the classic autism services there. I'm not sure how to answer the question otherwise, though, because students who have speech and language services on their IEPs will receive them regardless of what service or school they're in.
I think basically this next question you have answered through the presentation, but just to highlight it, what's the main difference between Connections and the ARS program? What is more like the Elementary Learning Center program?
I can answer that briefly. The majority of students, many of students who have received Learning Center services do go on to articulate into Autism Resource Services. The primary difference is the pacing of the curriculum, where the students' strengths and needs are. And I think you would have heard, if we go back to the slides that Ms. Lanham and Ms. Daisy presented, it talks about the amount of time spent in general education, the types of courses the students might access, and the specific needs that are addressed in resource classes.
As you were doing the presentation for the Autism Connection Services, there were several references to special education support in that are outside of the language and mathematics classes. And so what do those, what does the special education support that the speaker was referencing actually look like in the program?
So I think you're referring to when I was discussing the supports in general education classes.
Yes.
So I talked a little bit about smaller self-contained classes, the English, the social skills, and the resource, but I also talked about support in general education, which would mean either a co-teacher or a special education para-educator would be available for the entirety of the class period, supporting the group of students who are in that class. For Autism Connection Services, it's typically support around executive functioning, social interaction with peers, rather than academic support. Obviously, if students have questions academically, they can ask them, and someone would answer them. But the majority of the support that our students tend to need is more around managing the workload demands and the executive functioning demands that are part of the workload, as well as making sure that they are participating socially in the class. So not over participating or under participating, and being a contributing member of the class.
Thank you. Next question is, how large typically are middle school classrooms for Connections?
So I'm going to answer that in two parts. One is that general education classes across MCPS are typically at the middle school level, in the 28 to 32 range. There's certainly some classes that could be a little bit larger. There's some classes that could be a little bit smaller, but across the board in all of the middle schools that I've ever supported and otherwise observed, that has generally speaking been the range of general education classes. Currently, in the smaller self-contained classes, they range a bit. The English classes are sometimes quite small, depending on how many students are in that grade level and how many continue to need a small self-contained English class, because those are not multi-grade level classes. English 6 is only going to be 6th grade students. So I would say those could be as small as 3 or 4, as large as 8 to 10. The social skills classes and the resource classes will also vary, anywhere from generally, I would say about 7 to 11 students tend to be in those classes. And there, I'm just going to add, because I did see a follow-up question about languages and electives. Those classes do take the place of the electives, which includes world languages. So for students who need the social skills and the resource for all 3 years of middle school, it might mean that they don't have room in their schedule during middle school for an elective.
Okay. Thank you. For the middle school connection program, I think, are foreign languages available?
Right, so that's what I was explaining, that
Yes,
that
yes, okay.
students wouldn't necessarily have room, but yes, every middle school does offer world languages. So if students don't need both the resource and the social skills, then they would potentially have room for a world language.
And sort of in a similar vein, for at the high school level, is there support available for AP level courses?
Typically at the high school level, we have the capacity to support the honors classes as well as the on-level classes, but we do not always have the capacity to support the AP level classes, the college level classes.
There's a question asking about accommodations for students who are above grade level in a particular subject area like math, but below in language or spelling or writing.
I'm happy to take that unless one of the area supervisors wants to jump in. But generally speaking, that's kind of the whole idea of special education, is that that specially designed instruction is available for students who need it in their areas of impact. So if a student has a particular strength in math, then we certainly want them to have access to accelerated curriculum. But then if they have weaknesses in reading or writing, we want to provide support and specialized instruction, specially designed instruction in order to address that area of impact. So that's all going to be driven by the student's IEP and designed accordingly based on the services that are on their IEP.
Thank you. Are grade levels for the autism connection classrooms typically combined or ever combined?
So I tried to touch on that earlier. The English classes, again, for the self-contained classes are going to be single grade level. You can't really combine English 6 and English 7 and cover the content, for example, but the social skills classes and the resource classes could be multi-grade level. So it could be 6th and 7th, it could be 6th, 7th, and 8th. The general education classes, for the most part, are going to be, and this is true for general education classes throughout MCPS, not specific to the sites that have Autism Connection services, but general education classes, typically English, science, and social studies in middle school are not going to be multi-grade level. Math sometimes could be because we have, for example, both 7th and 8th graders in MCPS who are taking algebra.
Next question. What's the difference between a subject being co-taught and receiving paraeducator support?
Yes, so typically when we refer to a co-taught class, we're talking about a class with 2 assigned teachers, one being the general education teacher and one being the special education teacher. Whereas when we talk about paraeducator support, that would be a class led by a general education teacher, but additional paraeducator support in the class supporting the students in the class.
What are the tools the resource teachers and connections are using in middle school to teach executive function skills? Do you have a specific method or a curriculum that's being utilized?
The executive functioning skills are really targeted through the resource class and are really individualized for each student. So for students who are also taking the social skills class, there might be some direct instruction around a variety of executive functioning and similar types of skills, but the majority of the support for executive functioning is embedded throughout the day. It's one of the things that the staff are doing in the general education and the special education setting. But then that's really the purpose of the resource class, is to help each student develop a system that works for them, rather than a universal system that everyone is required to use.
Thank you. The next question refers to the specialized services that kids get at the elementary school level, like OT or speech, and at the middle and high school level. Are they continued in some way, or are they sort of absorbed by the general language, classes?
Any related service that a student requires would be reflected on their IEP. And if a student has speech and language service or occupational therapy service or any related service, it would be very explicit on the IEP how that is going to be provisioned at any level. So it's not an automatic OT ends in 7th grade or anything like that. It's a very individualized decision.
Thank you. You had already referenced class size for middle and high school, but I think this question sort of is more directed toward sort of ratios. How many paras are we looking at typically in the classrooms for these programs, both ARS and Connections and Bridge?
I'll jump in and answer that. It's going to vary because certainly within the set of services, depending on the needs of the student, there may be more than one paraeducator in the classroom, but there's typically at least one paraeducator. And again, that's going to depend on the needs of the students in the classroom because not every classroom will require additional supports of a paraeducator. So it could be one, it could be two, it could even be three in some instances.
Thank you. This is I don't think this has come up before. Are there any high school vocational technical offerings for students at any of these programs? They're diploma-bound, so.
I'm not sure I understand fully, but we certainly have students who are working on alternate learning outcomes who are served in the learning and academic disability services. So in other words, the parent has given consent based on the IEP team recommendation and the student meeting criteria for alternate learning outcomes. However, based on the team's recommendations, the child may require more inclusive services, or it may in fact be the request of the parent because they did not get consent for more restrictive services. But we certainly will work to make sure that we meet the needs of all students.
But basically in the diploma-bound programs, those are not offered. Is that, am I getting that right?
What I would tell you is that each student, based on the IEP team recommendation, is how we make that determination. It's not, if I said to you it's one way, that would not be true, because each time that an IEP team meets, that decision is based solely on the merits of what is the data that's being reviewed by the IEP team.
Thank you. This is specifically for the Bridge program. Are there AP or honors classes available through the Bridge program?
Yes. Well, they're not offered in a self-contained setting. When students are ready to take that level of course at the high school level, they do need to be in an inclusive setting, and we determine what needs the student has as far as support. Usually by the time our students are juniors and seniors, if they've been in Bridge for 9th and 10th grade, they've gained a lot of skills and they're moving towards more inclusive settings, but they still have the supports available through Bridge services.
As a follow-up to that question, for the Bridge program, what's the mix of general ed and self-contained? Is it more typically one or the other? And how do you determine whether a particular student in Bridge joins general ed or is directed toward a self-contained classroom?
So I'll answer that one first. That's an IEP team decision, and the IEP team would be looking at all of the data presented and discuss, when we get to services, we discuss each part of the day and what that student requires in order to meet the goals and objectives identified on his or her IEP. So that is an IEP team decision. Bridge services, I'm not totally clear. I totally understand the first part of the question, but we are a set of services for students with disabilities, and they, for the most part, require a good portion of their day in a smaller self-contained environment with other students that have disabilities. So for the majority of their day, I would say they are in self-contained environments with other students that have disabilities. Unless they are, a part of their IEP is they're included in, let's say, a general education math class, then they would be with general education students as well as other students with disabilities.
Thank you. For all these diploma bound programs, how do these programs prepare students for college? And do you have the percentage of students who actually go on from these programs to college?
We don't have that data here to be able to share with you tonight.
Is it possible for families who might get placed in a specific program to get a tour of the school or facility before they transition into the program?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Does the bridge program accommodate students who are below grade level?
Yes, but not too much below grade level. So I think all of us in our special education services are working with students with a variety of needs. And so for the most part, our students are on or above grade level, but we do have students that need supports, you know, reading or math intervention or challenges with writing. And we are certainly working to support those students as well.
I think I have an idea of how you might respond to this question, but are there specific metrics MCPS uses to determine whether a student should be served in a homeschool model, Autism Connections, or Bridge?
So again, that would be an IEP team decision. There's not one specific set of criteria.
My student is used to a small classroom. What safety or bullying measures are in place once transitioning to a larger school? Are gen ed students educated on what autism is and that students with autism may be in their class?
So I can give you a general overview of that. Many of our students require specific supervision and supports throughout the school day, including transitions and other times of vulnerability. If a student requires supports beyond those that are provided within the service or the school, those are issues that are addressed in students' IEPs, and we may prepare a safety plan for an individual student. The preparation for general education students varies from school to school, but many, if not most of our middle schools that have specific services for students on the spectrum or other groups of students with special needs can receive and do receive support and education from counselors, from service staff, from other special educators around understanding and accepting differences for younger kids, and then neurodiversity lessons as our kids get older.
Thank you. I actually think the rest of the questions are very particular to individual students, and I know that we have more to cover. So I think actually this is a good time to move on to the next section.
Okay, Derek, do you want to put the next set of slides up? Okay, thank you. So now we'll move on to alternate learning outcome services with Anne Marie. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. Derek, you can move to the next slide. So we're going to take a moment and talk about our alternate learning outcome services, which generally refers to our services where students are working towards a certificate of completion as opposed to a high school diploma. And we do have a small number of students that are, due to the nature and severity of their disability, they participate in what we call the alternate academic framework, which includes an alternate assessment and instruction aligned with our alternate academic achievement standards. All of our students pursuing these alternate learning outcomes, as we refer to them as a whole, receive their instruction based on the general education standards aligned to their respective grades. But it is important to note that these standards are reduced in breadth, depth, and complexity in comparison to the general education standards. Something unique about our students participating in these services is that they must be found eligible through the IEP process using a tool called the Appendix A, which is the participation and criteria checklist for the alternate standards and assessment. As part of this process, the team must determine whether or not a student has a significant cognitive disability. Also unique to the state of Maryland, parents are able to give their written consent or refusal in this participation. Next slide. So here we have an example, and I apologize for the small text, of our general education standard next to our alternate standard. And I would urge you to look at this second one. I think is a great example of how the standard may be modified to meet our students' needs. So our general education standard is, we would be asking our 9th grade students to determine a central idea of text, analyze its development over the course of the text, include how it emerges and is shaped and refined by specific details, and provide an objective summary of the text. So an example of what our alternate standard would be, or those most essential piece would be, can the student determine the central idea of a text and select details to support it? This standard also may be broken down even further to meet your child's instructional level. Next slide. So I'm going to begin by talking about 2 sets of services, the first being our Learning for Independence, which is often referred to as LFI. And in our secondary setting, our LFI students do participate in self-contained special education instruction in all of their core content areas, but they often are included and participate with their general education peers in their electives. These are also often electives that the students have chosen themselves. Our secondary students are also following a typical bell schedule aligned with their middle school or high school. And the students are often then changing classes to a different teacher. So you would often see it departmentalized, where a child would have a different teacher for math, English language arts, science and or social studies, and perhaps even a vocational course. Like I said, our LFI students are participating in these alternate achievement standards, and you are going to see instruction in both whole groups and small groups. Something that's very important for our Learning for Independence services, especially at the secondary level, is that they are accessing community-based instruction. So our students are learning skills in their classroom. They're working on those skills in their school, but ultimately we'd like for them to be able to practice and generalize those skills to their outside community. We know that our students often need repetition of these skills, and what better place to do that than in the context in which that skill will actually be used. Our students also participate in work-based learning or job-related training. Starting in our 10th grade, we have students who are going out into job sites within the community, but we also have options for students to participate in school-based work sites. Some examples of those In-school job sites may be a business that they're running. We have multiple high schools that run coffee businesses, cookie businesses, or even a school store, and they're selling to their peers and to the staff at their school. And then we also have students who are leaving the school with the support of a teacher and or a paraeducator to places like Marriott and CVS, among many others. The students who are accessing our Learning for Independence services at the secondary level, they typically have a reliable form of communication, whether that be a vocal, verbal, or with a communication device and or sign language. They also typically have a very consistent response method. And what I mean by that is that the students, we are able to truly assess what the student knows and can do. And many of these students are very independent in their classroom routines, and often at the secondary level, fairly independent throughout the school building, and may just need some adult proximity or oversight. And we have students with all types of disabilities accessing these services. Next slide. So the next set of services is more, we would refer to as more restrictive, and I'll highlight a couple of reasons why, because you are going to hear many of the same things, so I will try not to be redundant, that also align with our Learning for Independence services. So school community-based, or SCB, are also self-contained special education classes, or students are accessing self-contained special education instruction in all of their core content areas, but they're also typically accessing them in their electives and or their specials. And the students typically are not moving throughout the building, as I described in our Learning for Independence services. They're spending typically the majority of their day with their special education teacher and their paraeducators. They may have one teacher that teaches multiple classes. So they'd be teaching their English language arts, math, science, social studies, and their community-based instruction. Certainly, the students would have opportunities for inclusion based on the student's IEP and their needs. You'll also see both the whole group and small group instruction, but the number of students that are in these classrooms are much smaller, typically having around 6 to 8 students. Again, with our secondary school community-based services, we're emphasizing their access to the community. We are looking at having our students participate, again, in that classroom community, practicing these skills in their school community, and then ultimately working on them and generalizing them into their outside community. And just like in LFI, our students are also participating in-school job sites and off-campus job sites when they enter high school. Some of the differing characteristics between our SCB services and our Learning for Independence services is that sometimes these students need more direct instruction to master their skills. Oftentimes these students also have very emerging communication systems, and that really is the focus of the services, to ensure that our students are able to respond, to those in their classroom and around them, but also really truly be able to communicate their wants and needs. Oftentimes our students in SCB are also require additional support to participate in their classroom routines and in their activities of daily living. And again, in our school community-based services, we have students with a variety of disabilities. And I'm going to hand it over for now to Samantha Dunbar.
All right. Hi, thank you everyone for having me tonight. I'm going to speak to our classic autism services. So students best served in classic autism may have significant needs in the areas of their adaptive skills. So as far as adaptive skills, those are things like self-care, communication skills, self-direction, social skills, leisure skills, functional academics, community work, or health and safety. Our students might also have needs in the area of behavior. Students may present a range of challenging behaviors from self-stim behaviors or needs in the area of social behaviors, self-injurious behaviors, or they might display aggressive behaviors as well. Students that we serve in classic autism also have difficulty with communication. So working on that self-advocacy, the functional communication, being able to express their basic wants and needs, social communication skills, that social reciprocity, conversation skills. And again, this is based on the individual learner's needs. Students in autism services are accessing alternate learning outcomes and are pursuing a certificate of completion rather than that high school diploma. The students that we serve are likely to stay in high school until age 21. Most students articulate to adult day programs for lifelong support. Next slide. So some student characteristics. Students require direct instruction to acquire those functional skills. Students that we support also require a highly modified pace, that systematic instruction and individual accommodations. Students that we support in classic autism also benefit from extensive, direct, repeated, and individualized instruction in order to make measurable gains on those IEP goals and objectives. Next slide. In looking at the service features, in classic autism services, students receive the majority of their instruction, excuse me, in reading, math, and written language in that self-contained setting, along with instruction related to activities of their daily living skills. So this will continue into the high school setting with expanding our focus on those functional skills to really help our students with building their level of independence. The instructional model and supports are drawn from evidence-based strategies that are autism specific. So students that we serve in classic autism may have the opportunity to participate in general education setting during elective classes, lunch, and or community-based instruction experiences. Inclusion opportunities are based, again, on individual student basis. Students do have the opportunity to interact with peers at some of our different sites and programs through Best Buddies. We do different peer programs, student intern programs, lunch, assemblies, other things. But again, that varies by school. Social skills are supported through foundational communication and social interaction skills, which are targeted individually through direct instruction and based on those IEP goals. These are supported across the school day and focus on interaction with both adults and peers. Students are provided access to alternate learning outcomes aligned with the MCPS curriculum. And our students receive intensive instruction based on the principles of applied behavior analysis. And then I think I'm going to turn it back over to Anne-Marie, who will talk about extensions.
Thank you, Sam. You can move to the next slide, Derek. Thank you. So our extension services are for students who need additional behavioral support. And these are students who are currently accessing a set of alternate learning outcome services. And for a variety of reasons, maybe having difficulty in accessing the curriculum and instruction due to interfering behaviors. Similarly to our school community-based services, our extension students do participate typically in self-contained special education instruction for all of their core content areas. And they're going to receive that whole group, small group, and also quite a bit of individualized instruction. Extensions has built in additional behavioral supports for students and additional social work supports for students and for families. The students in our extension services, they are also participating in that community-based instruction and in the on-the-job training in our secondary settings. Students are going out in the community typically 2 times a week to practice those skills that they're learning in their classroom, and also practice a lot of those replacement behaviors or communication skills that they may be working on in their classroom as well. In high school, starting in 9th grade, the students are participating in their on-the-job work-based learning activities. And then starting in 10th grade, they also have the opportunity to go off campus to participate. Currently, we have students who are working at the Dollar Tree and at the Goodwill. Again, many of these students do have needs and need specifically some direct instruction in their communication. And again, they also, as I described with our school community-based services, they also may need more direct instruction in establishing a really strong response method and or system of communication between the student and the staff. Many of our students also require support in their activities of daily living and to participate in their typical classroom routines. Students in extensions, like I had said, also require additional supports to address that challenging behavior. And in addition to our social work support, extension services have a school psychologist, a behavior support teacher, and a program specialist. And they really work as a multidisciplinary team to create behavior intervention plans and family support plans for the students and their families and their teachers. And I believe at this time, I'm going to hand it back over to Nora for our Q&A.
Okay, thank you. So we have a fair amount of time. We can also take questions that you may still have from the first set. So Julie, go ahead.
Thank you so much to Chris. I feel like a lot of the questions that came in through the chat, Chris Deacon has actually answered in the chat real time, and actually a lot of the parents have answered each other's questions as the second set of slides presentations were being made. So I am going to try to go back to some of the questions that we skipped over during the earlier set. And some of them, I do apologize, are, I think, specific to, individual students. But since we do have time, I would like to go ahead and ask these questions, if that's okay. If a child gets an IEP very late in 5th grade, like in February, is it still possible to be considered for an autism program placement for 6th grade? When would that placement conversation take place?
So it all depends on the IEP. In other words, it's absolutely not too late. The IEP team would meet to talk about what are the appropriate services. If a child just received an IEP in February, it's very likely that the team would wait a couple of months to collect some data to see how the child is responding to what's in place. And they would come back together to make appropriate decisions about middle school services. So perhaps in the latter part of the spring, just simply because they want to give the child an opportunity to acclimate and access the special education or specially designed instruction. So it is not too late. It's never too late because IEPs are all year long, if you will. It doesn't stop because summer comes.
Thank you. I don't know if you would have data for this, but a parent asked, it would be helpful to hear what careers students go into after the various programs. Do you have any data on that?
I don't think we have specific data, but I see that Pat Cochran, our transition supervisor, is here. She may be able to give some additional insight. She provides transition services for all students across the county who receive special education services that turn age 14. So Pat, I don't know if you want to just speak generally some of the different post-secondary options that students do pursue.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. I'm really happy to be here to join you this evening. So our students do a variety of programs. You know, we have for our diploma-bound students, many of them are now participating in some of our early college or our Montgomery College programs while they're still in MCPS. Earlier this evening, there was a question about the work opportunities for students. We have many students participating in our CTE, our career technology education opportunities offered through Edison or Seneca Valley or through the home high school. We have students who participate in our CCRD program where they are working during their final year with us, either in an internship or a paid job, preferably in an area of interest. An up and coming area that we're really excited about is the increased number of work-based learning opportunities for our students so that they can be exposed to different career areas. That includes internships, a variety of internships, our youth apprenticeship programs that actually take place while they are still with us in MCPS, and also apprenticeship programs that they may start during their final year with us, and then when they leave, they go into the actual apprenticeship. So our students do a variety of things. It really depends upon their IEP. It depends upon the individual student interest, what their outcomes are, if they are diploma bound, if they are certificate bound, if they are interested. We have many students who go on to college and many who go on to training opportunities. Our ALO students tend to go on to supported opportunities with developmental disability or DDA administration services. Hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for a profile of children who might meet the academic criteria for one of the diploma-bound programs, but they have a big gap with their adaptive skills. For instance, it would be a problem for such a student would be to go to change classes on their own. Where would such a profile student kind of end up? Will they be placed in one of the diploma-bound programs with additional support, or would they have to go to one of the non-diploma tracks?
It really is just an individualized decision based on the student's strengths and needs. And as Ms. Tagliaferri explained, to qualify to pursue alternate learning outcomes or a certificate of completion, there are very specific criteria in the state of Maryland that a student must qualify for that level of modification. And so outside of that, when we're talking about our students who are pursuing general education curriculum, it's really about developing an IEP that addresses that student's specific needs, even if they do have needs that may be slightly less academic.
Thank you. For a family that is in the process of moving into Montgomery County from out of state, who can they talk to share their current IEP and other evaluations? What's the process?
So when a family moves into Montgomery County Public Schools, we ask that they enroll in the neighborhood school, and that is where the process will begin. So based on the home school attached to their address, the area supervisor would become involved. The IEP team would review the IEP to implement comparable services based on what's in the IEP.
I've got a question. Can a student in connections participate in extensions? Oh, that actually, sorry, that was already answered. Is it easier to go to a connections program if a student is in the Asperger's program, such as the one at Diamond Elementary School?
So we've changed the name of the Asperger services, including at Diamond Elementary School, to Connections. So Connections spans elementary through high school, and many of our students continue in that service, while others may, by virtue of their IP, go to another setting.
I have a question here asking whether you could say a few words about MCPS specialized schools such as Stephen Knowles or Longview. What kind of student profile do these schools work with? Do referrals happen through IEP decisions or some other way?
So referrals to Stephen Knowles and Longview and other separate schools happen through the IEP team, typically at the central IEP level. The student population at Stephen Knowles or Longview tends to be comprised of students who have significant medical needs, are medically fragile, have multiple and significant disabilities.
I would only add that with Stephen Knowles and Longview, that is able to be determined at the IEP team table. It doesn't require a CIEP referral.
All right, thank you. If a student is switched from a diploma track to a certificate path because of the level of of academic levels being below 2 to 3 years, would it be possible for such a student to get a high school diploma by taking classes at Montgomery Community College, or is there another path?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Basically, for a student who was in a diploma-bound track and then had to go to a non-diploma-bound track because of getting behind on their academic achievement, could they get a high school diploma by going to Montgomery College is the question, but is there an alternate path to returning to the diploma-bound track?
I think that we would probably need more information to answer that. It sounds more individualized, but Montgomery College could not award a high school diploma. That would have to come from Montgomery County Public Schools.
Can a homeschool-based team participate in any of the job training or community-based experiences that are offered through MCPS?
The student would have to be enrolled in a Montgomery County Public School versus the homeschool. Homeschool is yet separate and apart from it. So the child would have to be enrolled in Montgomery County Public Schools in the actual set of services.
If autism is the primary diagnosis on the IEP, should the IEP team be recommending at least one of the services presented here?
I want people to remember, I think that we have to do a better job of presenting our pie chart at the beginning of the presentation. One of the great things about having that visual representation is that just as our students on the spectrum vary tremendously in their strengths and their needs, so then do their service requirements in school. And so we have students with autism who receive very minimal services as represented in that pie chart, and students who require a private separate day school. So our students are scattered. If you look back at the pie chart, our students are scattered, I think appropriately, across all service combinations available in MCPS. There we go. Thank you, Derek. That was you. I do think that if you have a concern about your child's placement, you should raise that with your IEP team. But our whole goal is to serve students as close to their neighborhood school and as less restrictive a setting as possible, while still providing the services on their IEP. And I see a question, whoa, April. April asked if it went by me quickly, but I think it says when we say homeschool model, is that essentially general education? It is, but with the modifications, accommodations, and services outlined on each student's IEP, and they vary a little bit in homeschool model.
Thank you. I see that somebody has their hand up. Deepika, please unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the time. I would like to know, like, what is the ratio of the instructor to student in the school community-based ALO program?
Anne-Marie, you want to respond?
She may have
Sure.
moved. Oh, there she is.
I am here. Our school community-based services typically have around 6 to 8 students, 1 teacher, and 2 paraeducators.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
I think we have, it looks like we have covered almost all of the questions in the chat and the leftover questions from the earlier presentation. So, Nora, do you have any closing comments for us?
I do. First of all, I want to thank all of the MCPS staff who presented and answered questions tonight. Before I do that, however, I see 4 hands up. Julie, do you want to? We do have a little time, so why don't we go ahead and answer some more questions?
Yes, thank you. They just came up.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and ask your question, Trish.
Oh, yes, hi. So I have a quick question. So I'm just wondering, how do these services get applied to the learning plan for the students enrolled in MCPS Virtual Academy?
So would not change in the virtual academy. They must implement the IEP. I will say that what we have done, the change in practice, is that when students are accepted with an IEP, we will now have an IEP meeting before they actually start to make sure that all that has been identified on the student's individualized education program can be implemented in the virtual academy. But if a child requires self-contained, that would be provided just as if a child required a supported class. The goals and objectives would be implemented as such and progress would be reported.
Gotcha. So it would be almost like a breakout room for them if they need additional one-on-one assistance.
The class itself would be whatever is required. So not necessarily a breakout room, but that could be used for small group instruction.
Okay, so depending on the IEP, I could potentially request that if I feel that is something my child could benefit from.
Well, they would definitely follow the IEP. And
Okay.
I think that based on your child's needs, you certainly could talk to the individual teacher,
Okay.
to see what else might need to be done. Absolutely.
Okay, great. That's good information. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Next question from SPA Prita.
In what circumstances a child placed through a central IEP could return to the home-based school?
So what would happen is if a child was in a non-public school, just as if they were in a public option, an IEP meeting is held, and the team is reviewing the special education or the student's individualized data to determine that the services could be met in a public option versus a non-public option. So it's all based upon how the child is performing and what supports they require, and if those supports can be provided in a public school option.
Thank you. And our last question will be taking from Perodin. Sorry if I butchered that. Please.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the delay. So the question that we have is, my son is a rising sixth grader, and he's assigned to a homeschool. Let's say, given scenario, homeschool A, and we actually see that there is another school that has an elective school or class base that is better suited for his skill set. The Montgomery County Public Schools system has access to complete a COSA hardship letter. And so we're looking to see if you could give us guidance as to what we could do that would facilitate us transferring our son from homeschool A to option B, for example. And I'm just looking to see if you could give us some recommendations on that. Thank you.
So I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's based upon, when you request a change of school assignment or a COSA. When a family requests a change of school assignment, there's certain criteria that's outlined within forms. One of them being a hardship. For example, if it's an elementary school student, it may be about where the daycare is located, or if a family member is caring for the child in a different area than the homeschool area. So it's based on whatever reason that the family may be requesting the change of school assignment. I'm guessing from what the scenario that you offered was that the family may request it based on an elective course. And if that is what they choose to do, they certainly can do that. It is reviewed, and if it's a discrete service, meaning that if it's a service that is not provided in all of the schools, then it goes to the Office of Special Education. If it is a service like homeschool model or learning and academic disabilities that would be providing in any school, it goes to a different office, and they would consider the request.
I see. No, it is. Yes, go ahead.
So who should we return this form to, the COSA form?
It depends on what services your child requires. So again, if it's a service that's provided in any school, it would go back to the home school, and then they will forward it on to the appropriate office.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think the final question that I see in the chat is, what is the ratio of students and teachers in classic autism?
So typically we serve anywhere from 6 to 8 students with a teacher and typically 2 paraeducators in a classic autism room.
Thank you.
I saw one more question about community-based instruction, and it was to ask, where are the students going and what are they doing? And so it is certainly gauged based upon age appropriateness, but it could be going to a community facility like a park or a library. It could be going to a mall. It depends on what skills are being worked upon in terms of what the classroom-based instruction is, because the idea is to move from the instruction in the classroom to the application in the community. So it could be the library, it could be a park, it could be a mall, it could be a restaurant, it could be really any facility that you find within the community. Parents are given notification about where students are going and what skills they're working on.
I see a couple
you-
more hands up, Julie.
Trish, did you have another question? I don't see, I think those are old,
Trish and Peridin
Yeah.
are old ones. Okay. And there seem to be a few more in the chat. Did you see them?
Yes, I see one that, do all high schools accommodate Asperger students and not just the ones with specific, programs that were formerly known as the Asperger's program, like Kins Orchard, but other schools, are other home-based schools, going to be able to accommodate kids who are, in that profile?
So dependent on the services outlined on the student's IEP, they may need to be served in a separate service like the ones that we discussed in the connection services, or their IEPs can be implemented in their home schools.
Okay. I've got a question that says, help me differentiate between SCB and classic autism.
So FCB serves students with a wider range of special needs and disabilities. There are students with autism there, but students with many other characteristics and special needs. The other primary differentiation, where in autism, while obviously a diagnosis does not drive the placement into a service, almost every student in a classic autism classroom has autism or will be diagnosed with autism. So the diagnostic category is different because SCB serves a more heterogeneous profile. But then the primary difference comes around the type and pace of instruction. Students in the autism program are typically those students who require a very structured instructional program and need and benefit from explicit repetitive instruction that builds and is based on the principles of applied behavior analysis. Students in school community-based services are better able to benefit from a more natural teaching, and I do, we do, you do model, and a more functionally integrated program of instruction within the school.
Thank you. I think this would be a great final question to end with. Are there any other resources besides xMinds and the MCPS website to prepare for enrolling my child at a special needs program and requesting an IEP?
In my opinion, xMinds has a fabulous website, and between xMinds website and MCPS, I think it covers the majority of the information that you need to know.
Okay, I believe we have covered them all. Actually, there's one final question I think would be nice. It's the question about how do students with autism access after-school sports and other after-school activities? Can they be supported by an outside support?
I'm not sure that I can't see or understand the question about the outside support.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that, but maybe the first part, to what extent can kids with autism access after-school sports and other after-school activities?
So students with IEPs are eligible to participate in after-school activities, both in their service school and their home school. If a student has the need for individual support on their IEP, then MCPS will provide that after school. The biggest issue that we have encountered has been transportation. There are activity buses that run from neighborhood schools to students in their service area, But in the case of our students who have to travel a distance, so from up county to mid county, there may not be an activity bus that is provided to transport students. I don't know if anybody with more experience wants to chime in here, but that has been my experience over the years.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chris, for that. And thank you so much to everyone. I think we now can call this to a close. Thank you to the MCPS staff. Thank you to participants. I'd like to invite everyone in the audience to complete a very brief feedback form that Annie, I believe, has put in the chat. You can just use the link there. Please join us Thursday at 7 to learn about MCPS special education services for elementary school students on the spectrum. And also I'd like to mention that March 19 is the kickoff to our anti-bullying series, which is co-sponsored by our friends at the Autism Society of Maryland. Stephen Shore will be the first speaker, and his presentation is entitled "What I've Learned About Bullying, Autistic Self-Advocate Stephen Shore Speaks Out." You can find all our events on our calendar at xminds.org. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and thanks again to our presenters. We're very grateful to you. Thank you.